Hey everybody, welcome back for another review. This time we're going to be doing Pathfinder, the adventure card game, Rise of the Runelords. That is a very long title. This is just the base set. I don't have any of the expansions or anything, and I've had this one since it came out, and I've struggled to do a review with it because whenever I do a review, I watch or at least search for reviews of other games first, and I either look for whether they have any reviews out or if I have contradictory views. That's why a lot of my reviews tend to be a little bit more pessimistic, because I feel sometimes that there's too much. If I don't like a game, first of all, I have to not like a game. I don't just automatically go to the contrary. But if I don't like a game and it's just almost strictly good reviews on YouTube from like the first like 5 pages that I can see, or like, you know, I have Undead Viking, Dice Tower, anything like that. If they're just all overwhelmingly positive reviews, I will put out a review. Or if there's just no reviews at all, I'll throw out a review. For this one, I don't like Pathfinder, the adventure card game, Rise of the Runelords. And I don't want to do the standard that I normally do where I give numbers out and stuff, because I don't really think this game can be conveyed in that way. Mostly because, to me, I don't even really think it's much of a game. And we'll get into why. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to compare it to Arkham Horror. For anybody who's not familiar with Arkham Horror, I'm sure you can check PACG and whatnot, but Arkham Horror is a cooperative, quote-unquote survival horror game, but it has a lot of similarities to Rise of the Runelords. It is a card-based game. There is a board and tokens and stuff, but really, aside from just a sense of movement in the game, they don't really matter all that much. It really comes down to card flips, which is very similar to Pathfinder. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to break down the entire game in turn structure. It shouldn't take very long. We're just going through a couple key notes, and then I'll talk about them in contrast to one another, and then at the end we'll go over what's happening. Prior to setting up both games, Pathfinder, I think, kind of has a little bit better because you can actually customize your characters. It has that campaign feel to it. Arkham Horror doesn't have an overarching campaign to it. It wouldn't really make too much sense either, the way that the game is structured. You know, you're fighting a different Elder God, or Ancient One, every day of the week. It just wouldn't make much sense. So Pathfinder, to me, kind of wins that out, because you can actually customize and make a character your own. It's not a huge extent, because it's just, what weapon do I want? It's not a huge amount, but it's there. The setup is pretty similar to both of them. There is deck building and extensive shuffling in both of them. Arkham is more dependent on if you have expansions, if there's deck building, adding what cards from which sets you're using. But Pathfinder is just deck building every encounter that you're going to do, and then shuffling them up and putting them on the table face down. Arkham is very similar. You put out the board, put your characters where they're supposed to be, shuffle up every deck for the encounters that you're supposed to have. Not a huge difference. I will say that, especially with expansions, Arkham Horror's setup is longer than Pathfinder, but Pathfinder's setup is, to me, it's just really monotonous, because it's like, take these one card, this one card. Because the way that the Pathfinder setup is, it has a list of cards that you need to put, like a number of cards from the different decks. There'll be like items or weapons or things like that, and you put 1 or 2 or 3 of those cards into that deck, and then once you're done, you shuffle them all up. It's very boring and tedious, and it wouldn't be so bad, but of the multitude of problems I have with this game, there is a lot of inconsistencies and typos. So you can't just be like, okay, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. You have to look at the card and make sure that they put it in the same structure. The card that tells you how many cards are put in each deck, you have to make sure it's the same structure, because sometimes they'll just put weapon or armor out of place, so you can't just go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. You have to read each one, and it actually takes up a little bit more time, especially if you want to play multiple sessions or acts, whatever they call them, in a single night. For turn order, now this is where I think Arkham really starts to shine beyond Pathfinder. Pathfinder takes the very standard rotation of turn order. You take a turn, then you take a turn. then you take a turn, then I'll take a turn. And it moves like that. In cooperative games, a lot of cooperative games use this structure, and it can work based on how long a turn generally takes or how much interaction happens, but I generally think that this is not a good way to go about co-op games. To me, it pulls the spotlight off of the cooperative nature and just turns it to, now you're doing stuff, now I'll do stuff, and just turns into a big game of solitaire with minor interaction. And Pathfinder kind of exemplifies this, which you really can't assist people much. Like, you could, okay, I'll give you an extra D4 to, like, okay, well, I'm assisting you in the fact that I'm giving you a D4, but I'm not actively doing anything on my turn. I'm just like, alright, I discard this card so you can get an extra die. It's not that amazing. Arkham, on that same act, you know, there's not a lot of interaction. They added it in later expansions where it's like, okay, everybody in your neighborhood gets things like this, and so there isn't a lot of direct interaction. Like, you know, Pathfinder is very similar in that regard, so neither one I really think wins out in that regard. But Arkham has it different, where it's like a phase rotation, where it's like, okay, everybody's doing your upkeep phase, everybody's doing the movement phase, and honestly, it is structured where it's like you go, you go, you go, but it's broken up into everybody does the same thing. Now everybody does the same thing, so there's less time in between your turns. If you have newer players or slow players, you know, it goes for any game that it changes how much time is in between your turn and whatnot. But it feels less encumbering than in Pathfinder, where it's like they have to do every single thing before the next person goes. And I just think that's better for co-ops, because if everybody's always talking to one another and, you know, putting input, it's like, alright, you should move here, you should move here, and do that stuff. You can do that in Pathfinder as well, but I kind of feel Pathfinder is almost aimless, and we'll get to that. When you're preparing for the turn, so before your turn actually starts, Pathfinder has almost zero preparation. It's like, okay, I have cards. You kind of determine what you're going to do, but it's all what your dice roll and what your card draws are. Arkham actually has a whole phase dedicated to changing your stats and the way that your character works, so that if you're trying to go for a goal, you can change how good you are at doing that. So if you don't need speed, you can reduce it for sneak so you can get past stuff. If you need fight or lore or, you know, all the stats. And it actually shows on the character sheet itself what you're able to do. These sliders, you move them back and forth based on the focus stat, which is right here. So you can move the sliders a number of ticks equal to your focus. So you can actually change your stats before the turn starts. This gives you almost a, like, if you have a goal, you can change your character to reach that goal, which I think is really strong, which Pathfinder does not have. During the turn, Pathfinder is weird in the regard that it's either really short, you flipped one card and you pass or fail, or depending on what your hand of cards is, you can have a very long turn as you just flip, 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 using to flip more, using to flip more. And almost every single time it's completely up to chance. A lot of people say that there's choices and like, oh, well, you could use this. It's like, you don't. There's almost no point in not using your best cards every time. I know it reduces your health and it reduces your deck and whatnot, but if you don't use it and you get hit, you're going to lose all those cards anyways, because your hand size is also your HP, so if you get hit, you have to discard one card for every health you lost. So it almost forces you to play your best cards in almost every situation, because if you run the risk of getting hit, you're just going to lose the other cards anyways. And I don't like that. Arkham, generally not individually long, because if you were to break it down and like, okay, you do upkeep, then movement, then Arkham encounter, then Otherworld encounter, and then Waldo Mythos. If you broke it up that way, the turns would be enormously long, but everybody kind of does one part together every time, so it reduces how much time is in between your turn. The turn itself is random. Arkham and Pathfinder go off the same system at its core of flip a card, roll dice. That's it. That's the core mechanic in both games. Flip a card, roll dice. Arkham is different in the regard that, okay, I'm going to prepare my character for this situation, because I know what's going to happen in the situation, because I can look at symbols on it, what I can expect to find. I can see that if it is a more stable or less stable location, so that I can prepare for the potential of portals opening up. You can actually choose whether or not you're going to adventure there, or if you're going to have some sort of market time, selling stuff and whatnot. There's actual choices. It's not just, okay, I go to this face down card. Oh, what is it? It's a vampire. I'm dead. Whee! That was a lot of fun. Or, oh man, it's a goblin. I try to stab it. I roll a 1. It hurts me. It makes me lose all of my awesome equipment. Great. Yeah, it's terrible. Alright, for the enemy turn, Pathfinder has, from what I've seen, has no enemy turn. Enemies do not act independently of you. They only respond to what you do in regards to kind of just stabbing you and maybe making an enemy attack you before you have to fight it. So just kind of throwing stuff out. But for me, it just felt like the enemy was more of a nuisance than an actual threat. The real threat came from the dice and the time constraints. Pathfinder, you have what I would call, I guess, 30 turns. You have a deck of cards that if it gets, at the beginning of your turn, you flip it. And if somebody can't flip the top card, basically if it's out, it's over. You guys, if you haven't finished the mission, you fail. Which doesn't immediately sound terrible, but it's pretty terrible. What this turns into is you have... It's especially weird because if you have 6 players, it doesn't add more cards, you just get less turns. So it's a game that is actually played better with fewer people so that you actually get to play more. I hate that system. And kind of losing my train of thought because I went on a tangent there. But time is the constraint in Pathfinder. That is your biggest enemy. You're always looking at that deck. What enemies you're fighting doesn't really matter. You're like, oh, it's a ghost. That kind of sucked. But we only have 7 turns left. We have to try to figure this out. And then your other opponent in Pathfinder is your dice. You could have the best weapon in the game, but if you roll a 1, you just lost, and you lost all of your equipment. Not only did you lose your equipment, your ability to actually fight, but you also lost your ability to survive. And that's the worst part, is you're hurt and you can't fight back. Which in Arkham is not the case. You have an actual stamina pool and a sanity pool, and it doesn't just generally monsters don't just steal your weapons and hurt you at the same time. They're not thieves and murderers. They have tact. Arkham actually has a sense of foreboding. There's an enemy. You see this card, and everybody knows. Like, if you've played Arkham and you see Shub-Niggurath's card, you're like, oh my god, Shub-Niggurath is tough. And you remember all these times that you fought Shub-Niggurath, and you kind of know what the weaknesses are and what the strengths are and what to do. And this card feels like it's actively moving against you. It's just an AI structure. It's just, do this, 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 and this. Flip a card, do what it says. But it's so much, the Mythos phase adds so much to the game that Pathfinder doesn't have, where you feel like you're playing against something, not just time. Once again, this game is the same structure of flip a card, roll some dice, see what happens. They're, at their core mechanic, are very similar games. Arkham does it better, because enemies feel like they're actively working against you. How many times have you been trapped in a neighborhood because a monster just won't move? That comes from card flips. You feel like the enemies are actually like skulking around looking for you. It feels like things are happening, and it's not just card flipping. Arkham actually has a little bit of depth to it, and it feels like you're playing a game. Pathfinder feels like you're flipping cards and rolling dice. Same kind of system. This one, Arkham actually has a feeling of almost role-playing to it. Which brings me, Pathfinder has terrible, terrible role-playing ability. It's been lauded for having oh, it brings role-playing to a different market of card gamers. No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. You read a card that has 3 lines that tells you goblins are attacking. It's the same thing that you've seen in every single game. They named it Pathfinder from an actual role-playing system, which is a great role-playing system. Don't get me wrong. I play Pathfinder. I enjoy it. I'm probably not going to play Arkham or Pathfinder, the adventure card game Rise of the Runelords, for role-playing. Just because if I'm going to role-play, I'm going to go play a role-playing game. And that's what happened. But Arkham, if you want to, the back of every card, this is probably a bad example because it's only half the card, but even this is more than what your mission objectives are in Pathfinder, Rise of the Runelords. This is just one character background. This isn't even talking about on later expansions when they have like what your backstory is more and personal quests that you can complete, but just the backstory of characters themselves. You can get into the characters. The enemies allow you to kind of have rivalries against them. For me, for a long time there, for 2 years probably, I was constantly being killed by the Hound of Tindalos. It would always find me and always kill me. It's a running joke in our gaming group that the Hound of Tindalos is my personal enemy and it has a vendetta against me. That doesn't happen in Rise of the Runelords. What is it like, oh, the goblins, they're total assholes because they took my sword. Like, it's just not a good game. I don't know why people like this game. It's a lot of money for a bunch of cards. And by the way, like, I haven't shown anything of this game because most, Undead Viking, Dice Tower, they all looked at this game. But look at this errata right off the bat. I couldn't even be bothered to get everything correct. And like, I'm okay with like some typos and whatnot, maybe some spelling errors. But if you're putting cards out there that have a requirement to roll a 14, but the actual requirement is 4, you just accidentally put a 1 in there, how did you not catch that? That's terrible. The art on these cards, so boring. Very, very white and boring, and they couldn't have picked anything better for the background of the cards. It's just people standing. And that was one of the huge things that pissed me off about this game. Being that I've played Pathfinder, a lot of this art is just placed on it from the books. It's previous art that they've already had. They did, from what I can see, not a lot of new art. It's very boring art. Like, spyglass. It's a spyglass. You couldn't put somebody using a spyglass. You had to just put a spyglass, caltrops. And I know this is minor nitpicking, but it piles up. All the small stuff just piles up on one another. And it's just so boring. White and a black line. Nothing. There's just nothing there. This stuff, this is very cool. This does the same thing. White with black text. But look, it looks like old paper that's stained. Just a little bit. Just put a little effort in making a game. Just a little bit. Look, a little paper clip to put the little picture on there. Not much. Didn't take much. Just makes it look cool. Just a little bit cooler. This one. Ooh, scary, in the woods. Look, torn paper. It's in mythos stuff. It's scary. Look at the back. Look, compare these. Come on. So boring. Many boring. I don't know. I don't find this game fun. At all. It's not really a game. That's why I'm not giving it 1 through 10. It's not a game. It's an exercise in monotony. Flip a card, see what happens. Arkham Horror does that, but it feels like a game. I don't want to play that game, because it is a game. I just think Rise of the Runelords would have done a lot better. One, I think that if they were going to do the role-playing aspect, they needed a sense of space. And like Legendary. Legendary is a card game that I don't necessarily highly enjoy. I play it, and because my gaming group likes it, I play it often. And it's a relatively fun game, and we'll put that aside. But it has a board. It doesn't need a board. It's a card game just like Pathfinder, the adventure card game Rise of the Runelords. But they give you a board so everything kind of has its place in the movement. Pathfinder could have done that. A small, not huge, could have done that so that you know where to put stuff at, and it just gives it that little bit of extra flair. You charged me $60+ for, like, what is it, 300 cards? Maybe, probably less, too? Like, where did the cost come from? You just overcharged me. This game, it should not cost more than, I don't know, 2 Magic starters, so we're talking like 20, 25 bucks. And the production quality of these cards is less than Magic the Gathering. I don't even like Magic the Gathering, but the production quality in Magic the Gathering is there. Whereas in this game is very boring art. Very boring game. So, to wrap this up, I don't like this game. And I know a lot of people do, and what really actually coaxed me into finally recording this and doing it a lot longer than I normally do reviews is that I just watched the nominees for the Dice Tower for 2013, and Rise of the Runelords kept popping up, and I was like, are there really people that like this game this much? Have they not played, like, and I know all these people have played Arkham Horror, and for, like, obviously Arkham Horror can't be nominated because it's not, you know, it's an old game, but why, like, what has this game done for us? All it has done has taken a good idea with Arkham and watered it down. Or you could even say has taken a good idea of Arkham, taken a good idea of Pathfinder RPG, put it together, and then watered it down. Because it's the worst of both worlds. It's flipping cards with no role-playing. It's rubbish. Alright. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, do all that nice stuff. There's no liking on the YouTube. I don't know why I said that. Yeah, all the board games are gone because my wife's out of town. So she took a lot of the board games. A lot of them are in the trunk too. Playing her new game shop. That's it. I gotta go play Warhammer Invasion. It's a fun game. Let's try it. You guys have a good one. Thanks a lot.